with that, I'm excited to turn it over to our first speaker today. So Dr. Jared McGuirt is in the Department of Nutrition in the School of Health and Human Sciences at University of California. That's just rolls right out of my mouth, doesn't it? University of North Carolina, Greensboro. He's an assistant professor, and his research focuses on understanding how the food environment influences dietary behaviors and how to leverage digital technologies to modify the way that people interact with their food environments. He has been conducting geospatial food environment research for the past 12 years across a variety of populations, settings, and research questions. And with that, I'm very excited to turn it over to Dr. McGuirt.
All right, thanks for that introduction. So I'll get my screen. I've got too many monitors. Okay. It should be good now. Okay, do y'all see the PowerPoint? Yeah, okay.
Yes, just expand it out. You'll be good.
Sorry. Oh, okay. Monitor setup is very confusing. Okay, what do y'all see now? Do y'all see the PowerPoint still?
The unexpanded version.
You do? Which one do y'all see?
It's not in presentation form.
Okay, hold on a second. Okay, I think this will be it. Okay, is this good now? Awesome.
Good.
Sorry, I've got 3 screens, so and the setup is always funny with presentations. So thank you everyone for your time. I really appreciate you coming today. And hopefully I'll make this an interesting conversation, more than a science or research talk. We'll talk about some of the research that we've done, but hopefully it'll be more inspirational and maybe conversational. And so the topic is Veggie meter in the food environment. So this is building on research that I've been a part of since my collaborators and I have had access to Veggie meter. And so I'm a proud owner of Veggie meter since 2018. So yeah. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so just a quick overview. I'll give a little bit of rationale for why we should look at or consider the food environment whenever we're doing research with the Veggie meter. I'll talk about some of our research as me and my research collaborators, and also talk about some next steps to consider. I want to start with the foundation that's really important to my research, and that I think is just a truth, and that's that place matters. Place matters for our diet behaviors. And my one of my goals in my career has been to try and understand that better, because it can get kind of confusing. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And so one of the foundational reasons for that is that there's something called the distance decay theory, which is familiar to people in geography, but not as familiar as it should be to people in public health or in nutrition. But the idea is that the farther away you are from goods or services, the less likely you are to make use of it, and vice versa. If you're closer, the more likely you are to use it. And so this is something that plays out in a lot of different ways in our lives, including in the way that we shop for food. And as you see here on the right, this chart I think is really fascinating. It actually, within our world, should be viewed as complex in that it's going to differ based off what food retail type it is. And people have different interactions with those different retail types. So today I'm actually going to talk about 2 different projects. One is focused on supermarket and one is focused on small corner stores. And so you'll see some of those differences play out. But I do think it's important that we acknowledge that the way people interact with these different stores is important. So like I mentioned, this can be kind of a confusing literature. You may have heard people say, oh, the food environment doesn't matter, or people, on the other end of the spectrum. I tend to think that it does matter, and I'll explain why and why it's been a little bit confusing. So it does seem to be the case, if you look at both quantitative and qualitative literature, that accessibility to food outlets may influence shopping behaviors, dietary behaviors, and nutritional status. Previous research Examining the association between food environment dietary quality appears relatively mixed. So the question is why? Well, I think there's kind of two main issues. One that we're all familiar with on this call, and that's dietary measurement issues. There's error inherent in a lot of the ways that we collect dietary data that leads to bias and errors in measurement, including things like recall bias. There's also spatial measurement issues. Food shopping is complex, as we showed in that chart, and then as we'll kind of go through in these different projects I talk about, it really is something that's nuanced, and you have to take a nuanced perspective on the findings. Previous studies have also generally used pretty limited spatial measurement approaches, some that I think have a lot of issues, including introducing a lot of measurement error and models misspecification. So you see a lot of people that don't really account for people's complex travel patterns and the way people usually travel. So there's different things that we can map. So we can look at availability. So this is the adequacy of the supply of healthy food resources, so the presence or density of those resources. We can look at accessibility. This is generally looked at as a distance or a time variable to a food retail location. We can look at different exposures, so what people are exposed to in their environments, such as fast food, et cetera. We can also look at other things that might be of interest, including assets within the community. So the main GIS approaches I use to look at the way that people are exposed to their food environment are something called service area buffers and using road network buffers. And so this is usually mapping their location and then creating a road network buffer or kind of a service area out from that to see what they're potentially exposed to. And this can also be done from the store. If you're interested in like a new supermarket being placed, you could place the service area out from that. And then also looking at distances, closest facilities, that sort of thing. And so now I'll just talk about a couple research projects. I think these did a really quick Google Scholar search. I think these are still the only two GIS Veggie meter papers out there. I could be wrong, but that was what I saw in my quick Google Scholar search. So the first paper I'm going to talk about was the title Association Between Spatial Access to Food Outlets, Frequency of Grocery Shopping, and Objectively Assessed and Self-Reported Fruit and Vegetable Consumption. And so we wanted to examine the association between accessibility to the supermarket where participants were surveyed. So a lot of times we survey people generally, we don't really know where they shop, but we just look at their access to supermarkets. Well, in this study, we did customer intercept surveys at the supermarket, so we knew where they shopped at. We wanted to look at frequency of shopping at the supermarket because that's related to access and has a geospatial relation. And we also wanted to look at both self-reported and objectively assessed fruit and vegetable consumption, and that was using the Veggie meter. And so this is the first study in the literature that looked at both GIS, objective measures using GIS, and the Veggie meter. So we had two supermarkets in two small urban areas in North Carolina where we recruited from. We did customer intercept surveys of shoppers. Participants were 18 or older. They were regular shoppers. We wanted to make sure that we had regular shoppers and they were English speaking. So we geocoded residential addresses, the residential address they gave, the address of the supermarkets, and then also we did retail food addresses around their residential address. And so this is actually a super important thing. Geocoding, it probably doesn't get enough attention in the literature, and I think that's why there's a lot of measurement issues. I just can't get into the nitty-gritty of this, but I do think it's really important that geocoding is done well and that you're using clean data. And we use a program called Batch Geo. And I'm more than happy to talk with anyone about geocoding after this. And then we use GIS accessibility, including distance to the supermarket where they shop and distance to the closest supermarket to their house. A lot of people were interested in that dynamic, like where they shop compared to the closest supermarket. Then we looked at something called the Modified Retail Food Environment Index, and this is a ratio of healthy food outlets to less healthy food outlets. We did this at both the census tract level, but also we wanted to create localized road network buffers of this. And so we used all those geocoded retail outlets and these service area buffers that then captured a more tailored retail food environment index compared to what you get at the census tract level, because not everyone's going to shop within the census tract they live in, and people's shopping behaviors aren't that neat. They're usually a little more complex. All right, for diet, we use for self-reported measure, we use the NCI fruit and vegetable screener, get fruit and vegetable servings per day, and then we use the Veggie meter. And we did 3 measures and did an average of those 3 scores. We looked at correlations and bivariate associations between the Veggie meter scores and these different GIS variables. So road network distance and time to the supermarket were surveyed, just same thing to the closest supermarket, density of supermarkets around the residents, as well as those different modified retail food environment index variants. We also did multiple variable linear regression, looking at Veggie meter scores as a dependent variable, the MRFEI scores as independent variables, and then we had covariates. Sorry, there's a lot to get to, so if you have any questions about any of this later on, then I'm more than happy to talk about that. So I always think it's good to show people what average Veggie meter scores we get. I think that's always interesting for people that have Veggie meters. So for this sample, it was 250. The standard deviation 75.4. Interestingly, for WIC participants, they had statistically significant higher Veggie meter scores than the non-WIC participants. Sorry, 284 versus 247. In terms of distance and time from the supermarket where they shopped at versus the one that they were closest to, this is similar to what other people found. People tend to people don't tend to shop at the closest supermarket to them, but they do shop at a supermarket that's closer than one that's further away. So there is distance does matter, but it's not necessarily the one that's most proximal. And people actually said that. They said that one of the reasons why they shopped at that supermarket was because it was close to where they live. So just looking at correlations, most of these correlations are fairly weak, but interestingly, there were inverse relationships by dietary measurement approach. So it's the relationship with the Veggie meter scores and GIS variables with the self-reported NCI screener and the GIS variables. So I think that's interesting. That's something that we'll see in the other paper too. But the weak correlations, I decided to look into this a little more, all right? And so I actually plotted this out. And as you can see here, the relationship between distance to the supermarket where they shop and Veggie meter scores is actually, and I think this is really important, really interesting. So I spent a lot of time like looking at this chart and thinking about this chart. And it goes back to distance decay theory chart. Like these things are complex and things kind of change based off the distance, right? And so what we actually see, at least with this sample, is that the people that live closest to the supermarket actually have lower Veggie meter scores. And if you live a little bit further away, so if you live 2 to 3 miles away, the Veggie meter scores actually go up. And then as you go further out, the Veggie meter scores kind of level off. And so I think that's a really interesting finding. And it kind of, again, talks to this idea that things are complex, right? And we have to think about this whenever we're trying to understand our data. Similar, so this is actually a plot of time. So you see it's a little more spread out than the distance variable, a little more leveled out, I guess. This is actually looking at the differences between those 2 stores. And so you can actually see that we did see differences in people's relationships between distance and Veggie meter scores based off the store. So these are 2 similar stores in terms of like where they are in the marketplace in terms of their customer market. But you can see that still like we had some differences. So even it could be dependent upon the store and the dynamics they have with their customers. Then this is actually looking at the relationship between distance and Veggie meter scores by WIC and SNAP participation. Oh, sorry, I actually clicked back. You can see these are somewhat similar. There are a little bit of differences, but I just think it was interesting to kind of break it apart by participation in these different programs.
Right.